Greetings, moviegoers. I'm the host, and today I'm going to be talking about my all-time favorite movies. And for me, this has been a passion project that I've been wanting to do for many, many years. And after all that time, I finally made up a list that I'm quite proud of. And so without any further delay, here are my top 25 favorite movies of all time, and I hope you enjoy. Number 25. The Abyss. Out of all of James Cameron's directorial efforts, this is probably his most underappreciated, and I still have no idea why it continues to get overlooked. To me, this has the same type of epic storytelling as all of his other films, but even more emotionally gripping and spellbinding. It may be a story that revolves around extraterrestrial beings living in the ocean, but the most intriguing aspects about this film are the characters. The way they are written and performed makes you believe that these are real three-dimensional people. Every time the main protagonists work together on screen, it almost feels like an adult version of the Goonies, or at least that's how I see it. And I did mention before that this film does have an alien subplot, but in order to make sense of it, you'll probably have to watch the special edition cut of the film. Sure, it may run over 3 hours, but it's definitely worth a look. The Abyss is a visually stunning and original piece of science fiction adventure filmmaking that I hope more people will discover. Number 24. Raiders of the Lost Ark. When I was growing up, the movies made by Steven Spielberg proved to leave such a profound impact on my life, as his films made me want to pursue a career in making movies. Even though I'm nowhere near that spotlight, I still hold on to that dream every time I see one of his films. The biggest influence for me was Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is simply put one of the greatest adventure films of all time. It features practically everything you want out of a movie like this. Iconic heroes, dastardly villains, damsels in distress, long-lost treasure, booby traps, fistfights, and of course, snakes.
Why did it have to be snakes?
Like I need any more explanation of how great this film is, so I'll cut this one short by saying that Raiders is the purest form of popcorn entertainment, and I continue to enjoy every minute of it. Number 23. A Simple Plan. Here's another film that continues to get overlooked, and it's weird because those who have seen it consider it to be one of Sam Raimi's best works to date. If Alfred Hitchcock ever made a film with the Coen brothers, this would probably be the film they'd come up with. The story begins with three men finding a bag full of money in a crashed airplane. The main one, played by Bill Paxton, fears the worst, that they might get caught for taking the money, and so they work out a plan of action if there's any chance of people starting to ask questions. But nothing's as simple as they hoped it would be, as things start to go downhill almost immediately after they find the money. The film does a brilliant job of showing how greed and corruption can tear apart a good man's life and how intense it could get. Watching these characters start making the toughest decisions is almost hard to watch at times because of how good they started out. We don't want to see them become monsters, but we also don't want them to get caught by the police either. The story, suspense, and snowy backdrop make this one of the most memorable thrillers of the past 20 years. A Simple Plan is a smart, intense, and all-around great movie. Number 22. Let the Right One In. When people think of vampire movies nowadays, they usually have the preconceived notion of it being extremely heavy on gore and light on story and character development, or even worse, having neither of those elements present. Luckily, this is the type of film that brings a dark story and characters front and center and follows them through and through without any setbacks. It's about two young outsiders who find compassion and friendship in each other despite one of them being a creature of the night. Seeing these two dealing with troublesome issues like death, isolation, and oppression is really quite fascinating. The chemistry the two actors have together is just unbelievable to watch. It may be a dark and at times extremely violent film, but it's first and foremost a love story that's both exquisitely beautiful as well as grim and tragic. Plus, it has one of the best climaxes in any movie. This might be rash to say, but I can't help it. Let the Right One In is hands down the finest vampire movie I've ever seen. Number 21. Alien. This was one of my first introductions into the, shall we say, the dark side of science fiction, as I used to more glamorous spectacles like Star Wars and even E.T. For most viewers and fans of this franchise, Alien is pretty much the perfect haunted house film where you have a small group of people finding themselves trapped with an unstoppable force with no clear way of escaping since it takes place in the far reaches of space. It's a brilliant concept that makes the story even scarier, the characters more frightened, and the surroundings more claustrophobic. It's also a film best known for having some of the biggest twists and turns that have become nothing short of infamous. I won't spoil them for those who have yet to see this film, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I still find them just as shocking as the first time I saw it. So despite this film spawning a few sequels and spin-offs that never fully lived up to its greatness, save for one and hopefully another, Alien is still one of the scariest science fiction films that'll have everyone hearing you scream. Number 20. The Shawshank Redemption. Considered to be the absolute greatest film of all time, according to IMDb as of late, The Shawshank Redemption is the type of film that deserves every sort of high praise it continues to receive. Everything from how it tells its story to the level of craftsmanship that went into the making of it all truly makes this one of the most unforgettable films. What holds this entire film together is the magnificent performance by Morgan Freeman. He's the main reason why this film stands the test of time and continues to move audiences for each generation to come. It's without a doubt a flawless performance and more than deserving of an Academy Award. He's just absolutely great in this. Sure, this movie might be a little bit higher on another list of, I don't know, let's say the greatest movies of all time, but since this is a list of my all-time favorite movies, it's a good pick for my number 20 spot. Number 19. Heat. Robert De Niro and Al Pacino are two of the greatest actors in the history of cinema, so as you can imagine, having these two pair up on screen for the very first time was a pretty big deal back then. It's basically the equivalent of the Justice League teaming up with the Avengers. That's how awesome it was, and it still continues to be so. As for the film itself, it's a fantastic crime epic with a lot of great character studies, engaging dialogue, and probably one of the most riveting heist scenes in recent memory. Michael Mann does a brilliant job of capturing the realism and intensity of these scenes that at times you feel as if you're watching a real-time documentary. Seriously, when has the sound of gunfiring ever felt so terrifying? With this amount of exciting action scenes combined with two powerhouse performances, Heat is an endlessly captivating piece of work as well as one of my favorites. Number 18. JFK. Controversy never seems to leave a filmmaker like Oliver Stone, whose films seem to divide viewers due to either political or extremely sensitive subjects. And JFK is no exception, as it does feature a lot of intriguing ideas of who might have been behind the Kennedy assassination that'll either have you hooked or rolling your eyes in disbelief. Personally, I found this film endlessly fascinating from beginning to end, despite knowing that everything presented on film may or may not be completely accurate. But then again, neither were films like Amadeus or Inglourious Basterds, and they all turned out to be excellent films on their own terms. One of the best things about this film is hearing all of these people talk, for about 30 minutes to almost an hour of conspiracy theories or classified files of what might have been the real cause of John F. Kennedy's death. The way that these scenes are shot, edited, and performed continue to give me the chills. They're so brilliantly handled. It's a compelling thriller with a lot of thought-provoking themes of obsession, power, and corruption that continues to generate endless amounts of debates and discussions for years to come. Number 17. There Will Be Blood. If I ever put up a list of some of my favorite actors of all time, Daniel Day-Lewis would be somewhere near the very top, all due to his role in this movie alone. Sure, he's done other great work in movies like Gangs of New York and My Left Foot, but for me, this is my favorite character he's done. He plays an oil tycoon named Daniel Plainview who wants nothing more to earn as much money as inhumanly possible by buying up as many patches of land that he could drain oil from. For 2.5 hours, we see him progressively become worse and worse with greed and power to the point where he becomes even less of a human being. This could have been a difficult film to watch, but the performance by Day-Lewis and the direction of Paul Thomas Anderson manages to take such dark material and turn it to one of the most engaging character studies as well as the most innovative cinematic experiences of the past quarter century. So if you're in the mood for some truly ambitious and successful filmmaking at its finest, There Will Be Blood is the film for you. Number 16. No Country for Old Men. This was a hard choice to pick over something as great as There Will Be Blood, since both films came out the same year and I love them both equally. So much so that I nearly had them both as a tie. But one of the main reasons this film edged out the other is that it is a Coen Brothers film and practically everything they do comes off as pure cinematic gold. They somehow managed to take the standard genre film like the crime thriller and change it up to their own advantage, and the final product ends up becoming something completely new and unexpected. There's also the great ensemble cast, which includes Josh Brolin, Tommy Lee Jones, Woody Harrelson, and of course, Javier Bardem in his Oscar-winning turn as one of the most menacing and downright terrifying on-screen villains ever brought to life. The fact that his character is kept a complete mystery throughout makes him all the more horrifying and unpredictable. Every time he shows up, he's always engaging as well as chilling to watch. Combining the best elements from the crime, western, and film noir genres and mixing them up with the Coen Brothers' sick, twisted sense of humor, No Country for Old Men is a fantastic movie that only gets better and better the more I see it. Number 15. The Lord of the Rings. Which one? All of them, because I always believed that this was just one big movie presented in 3 parts, kind of like Kill Bill or the last Harry Potter movie. Everything about the Lord of the Rings trilogy redefines the term epic. The storytelling, the characters, the action, the score, the entire scope of these films are so huge that you can't help but be overwhelmed by how much skill and effort went into making it all possible. Sure, watching each film back to back would take up nearly the entire day, but it's still one of those event films that brings you practically everything you could ever want in a film. Action, suspense, romance, drama, fantasy, adventure, magic, and much more. Until another big franchise comes along, The Lord of the Rings will remain as the greatest film trilogy of all time. Number 14. Princess Mononoke. The way I see it, you can't make up a list of your favorite films without including at least one animated feature, and for me, it's Princess Mononoke from the great and powerful Hayao Miyazaki. Everything he does in his films in terms of his storytelling and style of animation, I just adore. But out of all the films he's directed, this is probably his most mature film he's ever done. The story is about a banished prince named Ashitaka who's slowly dying of a curse inflicted upon him by a giant demon boar that also gives him supernatural strength and power. He ventures off into the west in hopes of relieving his curse, but instead finds himself caught in the middle of an ongoing war between man and beast. What's great about this scenario is that it never points its finger on who is the main villain, as each person and animal has his or her own reasons of why they do the things they do. You really get a sense of what they're all going through, and that's what makes each character come off as three-dimensional. One of my favorite moments is whenever a certain character goes on a long walk, letting you soak up the scenery and atmosphere that the film has created. Moments like these tend to make me forget that I'm watching an animated film. It's almost hypnotic if you ask me. Princess Mononoke is a beautiful work of art and one that truly inspires awe. Number 13. Picnic at Hanging Rock. I doubt many of you have even heard of this one, so I'll try not to dwell too long. I first saw this back when I was attending high school in Germany, and to this day it remains one of the most haunting films I have ever seen. It takes place in Australia in the early 1900s, and a group of boarding school girls go on a Valentine's Day picnic to a place called Hanging Rock. 3 of the students end up exploring the rock when all of a sudden they vanish without a trace or explanation. Was it something physical or supernatural? This not only frightens the school, but drives the entire town in a state of panic as well as obsession into figuring out what just happened. The movie leaves plenty of subtle clues and theories on what might have happened, but the movie isn't primarily about the mystery. It's about how driven these people are into wanting to know the truth and how far they'll go to get to the bottom of it. Even though it's not a full-blown horror flick, I still find this to be one of the most chilling and eerie films as any other thriller. Mainly because it plays around with what's unseen, and therefore your imagination goes wild on an almost horrific level. For years, this film has plagued my mind with its gorgeous cinematography and inexplicable mystery, and if that's not a sign of a great film, I don't know what is. Picnic at Hanging Rock is a beautiful enigma that's worth uncovering. Number 12. 12 Angry Men. Yeah, I know it's weird to put a movie with the number 12 in the title in the number 12 spot, but you know what? It seemed like a right place to put it, and it's too late to double back now. With that said, this is a flawless film from beginning to end. From the simple story to the ensemble performances, this movie just reeks of sheer perfection. What's great about it is that it is essentially a murder mystery, and yet the entirety of the movie takes place in one setting where 12 jurors decide the fate of a young man trialed for the death of his father. 11 of the men are convinced he's guilty, while the remainder feels there's enough room for a reasonable doubt. And similar to JFK, watching these people talk about this infuriating case is what transcends the simple story to the level of masterpiece filmmaking. If I were to make a list of what I thought were the greatest movies ever made, 12 Angry Men would definitely come somewhere near the very top. Number 11. Inception. After making such critical and profitable hits like The Prestige and The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan solidified his somewhat immortal greatness when he released what many have claimed as his most challenging film to date. The idea of people entering each other's dreams is nothing completely new that we haven't seen before, but how Nolan approaches his story makes it feel all the more fresh and original. Borrowing elements from sci-fi thrillers and heist movies, Inception is a unique and intelligent motion picture that features some stellar performances as well as some of the most mind-blowing action scenes you'll ever see. You've probably heard countless times of why people call this one of the best movies to come out in this new generation, so I'll conclude with saying that in about 10 or 20 years, I think people will continue to debate and fascinate over the brilliance that is Inception. Number 10. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You've heard the music, you've seen the countless parodies, now go see the movie because it is, in my opinion, the definitive Western that you have to see before you die. Even though it is in fact a part of a trilogy of spaghetti westerns first started by A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More, I wouldn't say that they are films you have to see in order to understand. Each movie stands on its own and it works a whole lot better because of it. Clint Eastwood, what can I say? He practically redefines the term legendary as he gives possibly his most iconic performance on par with Dirty Harry as the man with no name who fills in the role of the good in the title. Lee Van Cleef is excellent as the bad, while Eli Wallach pretty much steals every scene he's in as the ugly, also known as Tuco. All of the three leads are excellent, and by the time they cross paths with one another, it's just pure cinematic perfection. When it comes down to choosing the best westerns, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the real deal. Number 9. Pan's Labyrinth. Even though filmmaker Guillermo del Toro doesn't have a whole lot under his film resume, I still call this film his most accomplished work to date. It's a fantastic collision of both fantasy escapism and wartime melodrama that could have been unfocused but instead plays out as perfectly balanced. It's the type of film that'll elicit all kinds of emotions like fear and sadness as well as joy and happiness. But even though this film plays out like a retelling of a classic fairy tale, it's most certainly not geared for younger viewers. It is a movie made specifically for adults and no one else, as there's enough monsters, villains, and graphic imagery to scar your kids for life. Also, it's entirely in Spanish, so unless your family knows how to speak the language, they'll wind up being both confused as well as emotionally disturbed. Aside from that, Pan's Labyrinth is a deeply moving and visually breathtaking feast for the eyes as well as the imagination. Number 8. Pulp Fiction. Quentin Tarantino always had a knack for coming up with some of the most inventive on-screen bantering since Woody Allen or David Mamet. And out of all of his films under his belt, Pulp Fiction showcases the very best of his talents. Everything from the Ezekiel 25:17 speech, the Royale with Cheese talk, the Bonnie situation, the Gold Watch, and the Jackrabbit Slims dance have etched inside practically every single moviegoer's psyche that it makes it almost impossible for every other inspiring filmmaker not to be enlightened. It's quotable, memorable, violent, disturbing, shocking, funny, charming, and overall completely original. Pulp Fiction is a complete blast from start to finish that I think most viewers will find impossible to pass down. Number 7. The Godfather Part 2. For the longest time, I could never decide which Godfather movie I thought was the most superior, as parts 1 and 2 are both equally great films. But as time went on, I started to lean toward the sequel in terms of what I thought was more memorable and how the story was told. I could definitely see why many consider this as one of the greatest sequels ever made. I love the fact that it's both a sequel and a prequel, showing how the crime family first began with a young Vito Corleone and how it presumably ends with his son, Michael Corleone. Marlon Brando was great in the first movie, but I think Robert De Niro plays the role just a tad bit better. He doesn't try to imitate Brando's performance, but instead reestablishes the way we saw the character to begin with, and therefore makes it entirely his own. And to add to that, Al Pacino's role as Michael couldn't be even more different than the first film. Just the way he switches from a loving family man to a cold-hearted monster during the course of the film is just riveting. The cinematography is breathtaking, the music is outstanding, the story is epic, and the acting is just beyond phenomenal. It's just one great cinematic offer that no moviegoer should refuse. Number 6. The Dark Knight. Making a great sequel to a comic book movie is one thing, but making a comic book sequel that's on par with The Godfather Part 2 is almost unheard of. Well, that's how most of us felt after walking out of Christopher Nolan's follow-up to Batman Begins. It expanded more on the Batman mythology and took it to even bigger heights. It also reintroduced an iconic villain such as the Joker with the help of a legendary performance by the late Heath Ledger, and seeing it all for the first time in IMAX was probably the greatest movie-going experience of my life. Even though the film originated from dark source material, I was still taken aback by how grim and serious the movie was. Most superhero flicks just dive right into the action with very little character development, whereas in this movie, moral ethics and political intrigue are the things that make this film just as enthralling as the action sequences. We see our hero make some of the most extreme and desperate decision-making in order to save the city of Gotham, and by the end, you just feel as exhausted as he does. The amount of chaos and anarchy depicted in this film will be hard to top in the next movie, which, if you haven't guessed yet, I'm extremely excited to see. But until that comes out, The Dark Knight will remain on my list as my number 6 pick. Number 5. Memento. For those who have been keeping track, I swear this is the last Christopher Nolan movie on this list. I can't help it, I just love his movies, especially whenever he deals with the human condition and how it affects one's mind as well as their lifestyles. The reason I picked this over the rest in his filmography is that it somehow manages to be a different viewing experience every time I pop it into the DVD player. The movie's backward narrative is without a doubt one of the most genius things ever put to film, and Guy Pearce does an amazing job of showing what it must be like to live one's life in reverse, and therefore you share his pain as well as his confusion. I also love Joe Pantoliano's role as the off and on again sidekick whom you never really know if he's 100% trustworthy. Whatever his intentions are, he's just a lot of fun to watch. From beginning to end, or in this case, from end to beginning, Memento succeeds as both a mind-bending noir thriller as well as a film in general, and the end result couldn't be more unforgettable. Number 4. The Last Temptation of Christ. This is probably the most controversial film out of my entire list, mainly for the backlash it received upon its first release in 1988. Christian and Catholic groups were furious when they found out director Martin Scorsese was making a fictionalized version of the Gospels that showed the dual nature of Christ's divinity as well as his humanity. The end result is one of the most complex and emotionally driven biblical epics ever put to film. Willem Dafoe plays the role of Jesus, who's more of a tortured human being than a divine savior. While most would object and call blasphemy, I think this is a very interesting portrayal. We all know he was the Son of God, but he was also a son of man. Therefore, he struggles the same way we as human beings struggle with every day, like resisting temptations around every corner. He wants to be a good man, but also has to come into terms with the fact that he is the Messiah. Being a part of a religious background myself, I too struggle with my faith as I try to overcome my inner demons. So seeing someone like Jesus, who many see as a perfect man, confront with the same type of human dilemmas is deeply profound and quite moving to me. There may be a lot of strange stuff that happens in the film that clearly deviate from the text, but the point of it all was to reestablish the way we look at our lives, faith, and spirituality. The Last Temptation of Christ is another masterpiece to add under Martin Scorsese's belt, and one that he should be very proud of making. Number 3. Blade Runner. This one actually took a number of viewings to fully appreciate, as I was introduced to it at such an early age. By the time I got older, I realized just how much I adored this movie. I love the dark atmosphere, I love the cinematography, the performances, and the intellectual themes of what really defines humanity as well as machinery. The ideas and possibilities of this futuristic world I find endlessly fascinating, as they set up some really intriguing discussions after the movie is done. Harrison Ford is fantastic in the lead role that requires him to be even more of a scumbag than Han Solo and less heroic than Indiana Jones. There's also great performances by Sean Young, Daryl Hannah, and Rutger Hauer, who really serves as the heart and soul of this picture as the replicant Roy Batty. Everything leading up to his closing speech really makes you think about how we all perceive the world and the way we live it. I love the shots, I love the look of the film, and I love how it's one of those few science fiction films that actually tries to make you think about the overall experience instead of tossing it aside for the sakes of big budget action sequences. Sure, it may have a slow pace for many, but for others, this is quintessential science fiction storytelling, and one that I believe to be Ridley Scott's finest work to date. Number 2. Goodfellas. For me, this is the prime example of how to make a perfect movie. Just leave it to a master like Martin Scorsese to show us how it's all done. The performances, the writing, film editing, directing, and song choices, there's not a single frame in this film that simply does not work. For all I know, this movie came straight out of movie heaven. We've seen movies about organized crime before where they all seem to romanticize the idea of what being a gangster is like, when in actuality, it's a harsh and brutal lifestyle where they not only kill the people they don't want around anymore, but they could turn on their own friends at any moment with no remorse or sympathy. The mob is shown as it should be shown: greedy, monstrous, and unapologetic. You could seriously say that these people are so awful that they make the Corleones look like the Brady Bunch. It's a fast, stylish, intense, and perfectly made film that I could honestly watch on a continuous loop for the remainder of my life and never get tired of. Goodfellas is just a flat-out good movie. And my number 1 favorite film of all time is Magnolia. This is perhaps one of the most original, ambitious, and emotionally driven films that dwell on your psyche long after you watch it. The first time I saw it, I had no idea what to make of it. But much like Blade Runner, the longer I thought about it, the more I started to appreciate it, and it made as much sense to me as to place it as my number 1 pick. I'm still a little surprised that this film doesn't get as much recognition as it should, because it is quite extraordinary to watch. Once people start to rediscover it, they almost immediately get hooked, especially during its bizarre opening prologue that sets the tone of the remainder of the film, which follows a series of intertwining story arcs that unfold in the most gut-wrenching as well as unexpected turn of events. Most of the characters in this film feel deep regret for the horrible decisions they've done in the past and look for ways of closure, while others want to hide away from their problems only to have them exposed in the most uncomfortable ways. Most notably, Tom Cruise's character. Here, he reminds us all why he's one of the best-known actors working in Hollywood. His performance in this film is probably his most daring as well as his most challenging he's ever done, and he pulls it off so well that I'm still kind of taken aback that he didn't receive the Oscar that year. Or this entire movie for that matter, but I digress. Themes like chance and coincidence are brought up constantly throughout the film as it slowly starts to show each of the characters' outcome, only to end on a note that's both unanticipated and completely out of the left field. People might complain that the ending makes little to no sense, but for me, it makes the overall experience all the more memorable because of it. And as for the running time, this is probably the best 3+ hours I've ever spent in a movie. It's utterly strange, brutally honest, elegantly shot, and beautifully written. Magnolia is my all-time favorite movie.